see so many people on the call today, and thank you for joining. My name is Rob Gould from Barker. We're going to run today's session about digitising the school estate, and this is actually a kind of a rerun of a session that we did recently at the Confederation of Schools Trusts Finance and Operations Conference. The session went down really well. Lots of people very interested in this journey, and it really is showing a bit of a forward look as to where we can use data, how we can streamline and make our estates operations more efficient through the use of data. And so we thought it'd be useful to rerun it for those that couldn't attend that particular conference. So really pleased to be able to introduce our two main speakers for today. Firstly, Paul Stewart from Plymouth Cast, and he is you guys, because he's at the sharp end doing this day to day, and he's going to explain a little bit about the motivations, the drivers, and the application of his journey through various data streams and the use of data and BIM in his school estate management. And then he's going to hand over to Jeremy, who is the technical brains behind the implementation of this, about how they actually carried out the journey. And then we're going to wrap up with how this generally fits in to estates management, good estates management for schools guidance, and your overall journey. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Paul, who can introduce himself in a bit more detail. And I hope you enjoy the session. I should just say a bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we will pause at various sessions during the session today. For if you'd like to come off mute and ask your questions, that would be great. Similarly, if you can keep your microphones muted in the meantime, just so that we don't get any background noise that can distract from the presentation, that would be great. We will have time for Q&A, but also please put it in the chat, and I'll try and curate those questions and direct them to Paul and Jeremy as appropriate. Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, everybody. Nice to see so many people joining us today. It would be good to get an interest of the types of people we have in attendance today. So if you want to put in chat, who you are and where you come from, whether you're an estates manager, whether you're a chief operating officer and so forth. And obviously we just get a feel of who's attending, and obviously feel free to add your comments and so forth, as Rob said. Okay, so jumping straight in, my name is Paul Stewart, and I'm the Trust Estates and Facilities Manager for Plymouth Cast. We have 35 schools across 7 local authorities between Penzance and Poole, so we cover quite a ground. Now, what I'm here today to talk to you about is the use of BIM to digitise your school estate for both strategic and operational management. And so we're being led by the data which we own, which we control, and ultimately we're here to improve our learning environments to provide better schools and better facilities. And so what I'm hoping to do is walk you through the journey that we've made. It's a progressive journey. We're still working on it, and we're still developing it to further areas, so that hopefully you feel a little bit less intimidated about these new technologies and how to use them. So there's 3 points that essentially I want to let you take away for today. The first is that we've adopted BIM as a spatial database for good estates management. Now, with this database, I can enrich it and I can layer it at my pace to my budget, whilst meeting our operational needs. And these are obviously going to vary and change, and no two schools are going to be the same, and no trust is going to have the same. And so it can make your own priorities. Now, the third point is that my digital environment is providing actionable insights and operational efficiencies, which we actually are using right now. Excuse me. Now, hopefully there's some educationalists in the room that will understand what we're trying to push through. And so while some of you may be familiar with BIM, those of you are not, let's relate this digital message to the hierarchy of needs. And so just as so Maslow teaches us from strong foundations, we can achieve the self-actualization. The main starting point to make this work is your data collection and integration. Without this strong foundation, you cannot transition effectively up through those stages, up to achieving that full digital twin and that future-ready estate. So you have to spend time gathering those data sets, understanding those data sets. And when you have that granularity, that's when the exciting things come. That's when you get to provide those intricate, highly detailed reports to the board, for the operations committee, to finance. That's when you get to put in your bids for external funding. So you need to know what you have before you can model what you want to do with it. And so with that, we start right at the very beginning. You know, what is the basic needs and what is our data collection? Now, I've said this a number of times that we're all familiar with 2D plans, PDFs, site plans. And my running joke, which always seems to run down, is how many of you have had to resort to photocopying a fire alarm plan that you've managed to find at the entrance of a school that's from the 1980s and it's dull and it's photocopied so many times, you know? How many of you had to do estates management from that element? You then have the ability of then trying to take it forward. So when we started our journey, I was pretty much in the mixture of that position. We had no data sets, we had no real drawings, maybe the fire plan, what format they're in, who owned them, how updated they were was anybody's guess. And so this is what commonly known as a data silo. So then through need, we wanted to apply for PSDS and funding. We needed drawings. And from those drawings, I was introduced to BIM, which has been highly used in higher educational sector for many years. And so it's a 3D spatial database for good estates management. Now, as I said, once you secured your strong foundation, once you secured your understanding of what you have, you can then optimize and move on so that your operations become more efficient and your effective planning and your reactive maintenance gets to use those data sets. And so there are 4 areas that I would like to currently show you through today. So this is some screenshots. This one is looking at net capacity for our schools. And obviously we can see at a granular level how our schools are used in terms of space, in terms of timetabling and curriculum. We get to see how effective that is with room uses between the day, the period and time. So for example, this model is showing, you know, a particular period on a Monday and what schools lessons are at different times. Okay, when you get to visualize the secondary school's timetable model, that's when you truly can see how efficient you are in using those spaces. That's make sure you're using the correct room types so you can manage the overcrowding, so that you can manage the expectations for the educational needs. You know, Ofsted say, well, you know, this is the wrong room type or the lessons feel a bit crowded. Well, here we can model. Here we can implement and design changes. We can model, well, what if we put that department, excuse me, that's always been in that building for many years and move it to another area? Other areas on your screen now, you can see asset management. You know, we've taken the minimum amount of data sets for the maximum amount of functionality for estates management. And so what you're seeing here now is the fire alarm detections and call points for one of my schools and drilling down into that. The final section here is looking at the analysis of the school condition data. So some of you may, you know, be relying on CDC, or some of you may have full condition data. And we've seen various iterations of integrating with those data sets. But when you can relate it straight to your digital model and you can show in color, which is your high priority areas, which are the areas of concern and what those needs are, and then obviously finance and model those data sets, you have the granularity at your fingertips and the ability to explain your rationale and your decision making to the board. Okay, so we've had stage 1 and stage 2. We're now moving up to stage 3. Now, what you have to remember is, I am not doing this all on my own. You have to collaborate with partners. You have to collaborate and get on with that. And so, yeah, I can move at a million miles an hour sometimes. And sometimes, I'm a bit obsessive in the detail and just want to get everything done. Be lucky to get recognition for that. But we have strong relationships with the likes of Barker, with the likes of School Property Matters, and some of the names that you see down there, to bring that in. So one of our contractors, for example, through using our asset management systems, we're integrating and pulling that straight into our BIM models, and to keep on track of our asset management. Without these collaborative arrangements, you're doomed to fail. It's so much harder. So we're now moving on up the tree. We started with that strong base foundation, understanding what you have. We're now starting to get efficiencies and performance reviews out of that. And so what you're looking at, as I said before, is BIM allows you to model and analyze operational performances and so many other data sets. You then have the opportunities, as I said, to model the scenarios. And so what we're now looking to do is integrating through the likes of the NZAP schemes, through the likes of PSDS funding, the ability to make those areas for efficiency, smart lighting, IoT devices, looking to link in your BMS systems. We're even working now for a BIM-based FM tender and FM systems that derive from these same data sets, so that you can truly have a single data source, a single data place, one place it can go, so that you can have great understanding, granularity for obviously all the key benefits that come along with decision making. Now, one of the areas here that is quite a good an area of focus is net capacity and so forth. So those of you who have secondary schools, or those of you who had SEN schools, will have been aware of the DFE's audits to come through and look at that. And it's basically what we've done is take the operations of the school, and we've removed it from the building to then treat the best way of modeling to put back into the school to get that output, to see what is the best way of using these spaces. Do you need to be shutting floors? Do you need to be shutting buildings? Do you need to be expanding? Where's your argument to expand with the local authority to the board? Where's your argument and your evidence? Well, this is your evidence. This is what you can use to substantiate your arguments for all those decision-making processes with the local authority, with your local board, or if you're single independent schools, this is exactly what you need to make your school, to take your school to the next step. Now, this is one element that we're looking at, which is the operational efficiencies. We're fortunate with 35 schools that we can now focus on, well, what does it look like for a trust? And so when you take all those individual data sets, all that information, through collating, you just simply saying, well, okay, what does that look like for my trust? So here, and it is an illustrative model. We have the schools across the trust at the top there, and you can see that you can look at exactly which schools are underutilized, which schools are going to be problems and concerns with the pupil projection forecast numbers, which schools are going to be returning less revenue, and more potentially what potential additional revenue you could be getting from your trust. And so this is a very useful tool for the high-level strategic planning of the trust, where they should be putting their focus, where they should be rightfully concerned, where they should be making those changes now, well in advance of when pupil bulges and also recessions of pupil numbers hit. Okay, so another area of focus, and bear in mind, this is the same data set. We're just coming up for different iterations of using this. So another area of focus is condition. Now, how many of you have had condition surveys and then HTPs, and you pay for these surveys and they come in, and the first thing they want to do is say, well, you know, this is our labeling code. And the advice I always use is, you know, the surveyor starts in the left-hand side, excuse me, the left-hand side of the school, and he walks in a clockwise position around your school, and essentially numbers everything 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. You then have somebody come in to do a HTP, and they like going anti-clockwise, and they use A, B, C, D, so that when you as estate managers, chief operating officers, or whatever your role is here today, have to analyze and cross-reference that information, rarely do the two align. And so BIM allows you to add all those data sets. It forces you to have named conventions for your spaces, so that you always call a spade and you're not calling it a shovel. Because without that common thread of understanding what you have and how the data sets relate to it, you can't then get the level of data analysis that you can see on your screen here. And so what we're doing is taking those steps further by adding in, well, we have condition survey data, we have HTTP data. Why can't we add them straight into our model? Why can't we have a digital survey that gives me all this information at once and cross-references it in a single system? And that's what we're building here. Now, one of the areas that we want to take is, one of the areas is you then get to your self-actualization and you're achieving the digital twins. And this is where the really fun stuff. And so I'm going to hand over to Jeremy, but just before I wanted to do is, you know, we've had a really quick crash course in what we've been doing for BIM, what we've been doing for good estates management, and where our focus lays. More than happy to pick this up and set in the questions in the chat. Where we're going next is FM management and smart tech. And so what you have to remember is that this is one system, one platform, one data set. And if you start with that granularity and that strong foundation, that's when you get the true insights and the true efficiencies, and most importantly, the value for money. So Jeremy, if you'd like to take control, please.
I certainly can. We've still not got my first slide in there, Rob. The video. Did we find that?
Oh, sorry. I thought that was the one for Paul's first video. Apologies. I'll see if I can drop that in a minute.
Right. Okay. I'll start talking without. Okay. So my name's Jeremy Pilgrim. I'm the Managing Director of Building Spatial Intelligence. And for my sins for the last 25 years, I've been digitising school estates, creating structured CAD data of the buildings by going into the schools, measuring them, and drafting it up into highly structured data. So, I guess the first thing to say is the difference between the structured and the unstructured data. That too many people, as Paul mentioned, have scans of old site plans, and they have scans of the fire plan off the wall that has been photocopied, and using that as their floor plans. That is just an unstructured picture of the layout of the school. What we're trying to do is to create a data set. We want to be able to drill down from the school to the block, to the floor, to the space, and then to know what's in the space from that 2D data. So we've been doing this for some time. I think we've worked on about 4,000 schools across the country. Interestingly, in the last year, I've heard Keir Starmer talking about his legacy will be the digital state. And I've heard John Dewsbury, the head of capital and sustainability at the DFE, saying that his legacy will be the digital estate. So very similar, but very key in terms of both the same message that we want to digitise everything. And that's what we're trying to achieve. So for my sins, I've been working with Paul for some time now to map all of his buildings, which we've done by 3D scanning and then drafting them into BIM objects. And what we're using BIM for is different to what you're probably familiar with BIM from. So for those who don't know, we've all watched the design and build programs on Channel 4 in the evenings where they show this is what your house looks like now as a 3D model, and then they drop all the walls and they build them up again to where they're going to be. Well, that's BIM, and that's BIM as a nice presentation tool to show what you're going to build, but it is a design tool for how you're going to build the building. So you can design something and then you can rotate it around, move it around the site, see what difference that makes to the solar gain through the windows, and see what difference that makes to the solar gain that you need for the PV on the roof in terms of shadows and things like that. You can do all of that design work in BIM. We're using it differently to that. We're using it as a spatial database. So as that moves slide, Rob, because I can't see on mine. Has it gone now?
Yeah, that's the Reba plan of work, Jeremy.
Right.
You're on that side.
Okay, good. Right, thanks, Paul. So it has moved. Right, okay. So what we're doing is we're pretending that that school was designed and built in BIM from the outset and has reached stage 6 of Reba. It's all finished, it's all shiny, it's all signed off, and it's ready to pass over for a nice soft landing into Reba stage 7 of operations and maintenance. And we're tricking the system into believing it's always been there, and we've just dropped it in at the end as a nice shiny new model with everything referenced within it so that it's ready to use. So what I mean by that is that I mentioned previously we've had our school block floor space referencing system. What we're now trying to do is to move on to school block floor space element and asset as a data structure for storing the information about the school. So instead of having a OneDrive, a SharePoint, a Google Drive as to where the information is about your assets. So if I want the operations and maintenance manual for our boiler, I can either go to the site manager's office and dig through the manuals there. I could take the DVD out of the front cover of the first manual and look for it in there. I could look on the drive for, did we keep the information in a folder for the person who we bought it from? I could look against my capital assets, is the information there? What we're saying is, if you put a box in the bin that is in the position of where that boiler is and attach the data to that, it's attached to the digital twin of that boiler. And if we draw that model at the correct place in the real world, the correct orientation and the correct elevation, that boiler is the only boiler on this planet that has the same XYZ coordinates. So therefore, I can stand in front of that boiler, point a phone camera at it, a phone camera that knows where it is in the world, and I can get the information for that boiler. So using it, as Paul said, as a 3-dimensional spatial database of everything. So we can start to now attach our information together. So the condition survey that Paul was showing before, instead of just saying that it is the west-facing wall to block on northeast corner of west site, we can now actually attach the data to that physical object digitally within the digital twin. And then the screenshots Paul was showing in the videos there are Power BI, a very freely available reporting and aggregation tool. We can light up those things in Power BI. So where are we talking about on site as to where these fire doors are that need replacing? push a button, light them up on a plan so we can all see and make sure we're talking about the same data. So we're doing that by using an Autodesk tool to share that information. And that Autodesk tool is allowing us to attach the information together from phone, from tablet, from desktop. And it's a very simple methodology that allows us to create a simple form that we can attach information to, or we could create a much more complex form. We could create a PDF form, a PDF smart form with all of our details of what information we want. So a simple case. Which of my rooms have got LED lighting, which haven't, and what proportion? Well, create a simple form and send a site manager around with the form to stand in the rooms and collect that data. And then we can create for those who are old enough to remember, a Blue Peter totalizer for how far through the project we are from that data. It's just a simple method of collecting it. So moving on from that, here we've got, hopefully showing on your screen, is this is actually Paul's offices. And what I'm doing there is walking through with my phone camera, but I've got the BIM overlaid over the top of it. And there you can see I've walked through the building and I've got about a 6-inch gap between the fire alarm call point in the BIM and the fire alarm call point in reality. But it's pretty clear which one it is. And you can see a little bit of X-ray vision there through
CPD, okay?
That hang on, let me just mute all. There we go. So can you still hear me okay? Yeah, okay. So here what we're doing is we're clicking on the objects in the bin from the phone camera to see the information about them. We could equally click on those objects and jump straight to a web link to the CAFM from there. Now, as you can see, I've been wandering around this. The BIM's got slightly out of line with the building, so I'm just showing on screen now how simple it is just to shunt the building back. There are some programs that automatically align it, but they're more expensive. It seemed quick enough to me to just realign by shuffling it around and visualizing it, because all we're trying to do here is show how we've created this 3D database that you can just click on the objects to see where you are and what the information is. So that's pretty much what we've done for Paul in creating this data set. Paul's now moving on from there to start managing this from an FM point of view. But what he's also got is a 3D model of the building that he can now start to play his tunes on for his energy modeling and his thermal performance going forward. So he can start to look at where does he go once he's done his PV and his LED, which are your big hitting numbers. The next ones are much lower numbers. The fabric interventions and what happens if I change the windows, you're down in 3 and 4% improvements on your performance. He can model it in great detail now before he starts to commit to anything, because he has a model of that. And that's our job, is to capture that data, get it into the system, ready for users like Paul and everybody else in this room, I'm guessing, to start consuming it. And that's me. So passing back to you, Rob.
Thanks, Jeremy. Fantastic. Probably a good point at which to sort of pause and take a couple of questions, which have come up on the chat, both for you, Jeremy, and for you, probably Paul, and we might both have some feedback on this. Derek was asking just about some costs, and I think maybe just to clarify, in particular, the BIM side of things. You know, do trusts need to have BIM software, or can this be accessed through your own sort of other systems? You mentioned Power BI, for example. Could you just explain some of the technicals and maybe the cost?
So, well, so let's take that one simply on taking the Derek first on the cost. It's not an easy one, because we don't know what you've got already. If you've got some of your blocks are relatively new and you had BIM drawn as part of the original project, then obviously we're not going to recreate those. We just want to integrate those in. There are other situations where it's a incredibly complicated building. There's somewhere it's a simple building. But as a rough rule of thumb, if you assumed about £4,000 for per form of entry, so there, if I say you're looking at a 1FE primary school, about £4,000, a 2FE would be £8,000. If you're looking at a 10 FE secondary school, you could be up to £40,000. These are worst case examples of assuming you've got nothing to start with, and we're getting you to the level where everything's integrated as you're talking about here. So I work on the basis of I shock with numbers and then impress you later by discounting down to where it actually is. Others lure you in with a low number and then build you up later. My approach is shock and awe and give you the worst case first.
And have either of you got any comments on the couple of questions from Matt and from Robin in terms of ensuring that the initial data collection is appropriate for later usage? And also Robin asking about integration with these systems with compliance software.
Well, sure. If I just said the compliance one first, Paul, quickly, sorry to cut over you, that compliance, it can be dead simple. If your compliance system has a URL per asset, we'll take that URL and we'll attach it to the object in the bin, and you just click through to it. We're not trying to replace that data. We're trying to locate and visualize that data. So you can talk now, Paul.
Thank you, Jeremy. Just jumping in on there. So if I take the Matt Bird question regarding initial data and appropriate for later users. So what you need to remember here is that everything that we're talking about has to have structure. Everything has to have standards and levels of detail. And so what you have is 3 important documents. And these are documents we're currently developing a little bit retrospectively. Now, the first is your organizational information requirements. The second is your employer information requirements. And your third is your asset information requirements. And so essentially what those documents do is the employers in the asset, you would use as part of your procurement. And so what you do is specify the level of detail, what's in scope, what's out of scope, what structure it is, what frequency it is, whose responsibility it is to update, to manage, and so forth. And so when you're doing any of these projects, whether it's an extension, whether it's a lighting design or any other improvement to the fabric you're building, you want to be able to model that and add those details into your digital twin for the update. And so essentially what you're defining is the rules for using the BIM and the expectations that you're placing upon any contractor or collaborator, and likewise, the level of detail that you're expecting them to come through. So those documents outline how you're doing it, what you expect, and how you maintain consistency and how you maintain the structures for going forward. And that goes right the way back to stage 1, which is your secure foundation. The second element regarding integration with compliance software. So there's awesome systems already out there. IAM, Parago, others that, I'm not going to name every single one. For me, I'm a maverick. They don't do what I want. They're independent tools. They don't align with the principles of the BIM and for me. And so what we're doing is actually integrating a single sign-on platform that does everything you've seen demonstrated here today and so much more for FM management, for adding in SFD20 as an API can be integrated in. So not only have you got where my assets are, and you've also got how to manage my assets, the contractors, the help desk, and so forth. And other elements such as smart management, your IoT, BMS, and so forth. And so what we're actually doing is a one-stop shop, single sign-on digital system, which is all based on BIM principles. Happy to take further details and questions later, but for the spirit of moving on, over to you, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Fantastic. Yeah, we'll have some time at the end for some more questions as well. And I think actually what Paul was saying there is sort of segues nicely into kind of wrapping this up, I guess, because I know from doing this previously, there's some very snazzy visuals, and people can sometimes get a bit overwhelmed by the scope of what's happening, and it's often so far removed from what you might be doing now that it could potentially be seen as a bit of an overwhelming option here. But I think if we take a step back and think about why we're doing it in the first place, and then recognizing that what we've seen already in the presentation is a forward look as to the art of the possible in certain areas, we can see that whether your primary driver is cost efficiency, is wringing every pound of value out of what you're spending on your estate, and making sure that your operational spend is absolutely as efficient as possible through procurement, through allocation and triaging of capital projects, through managing your maintenance programs, or whether you're looking at a better way to improve governance and have those layers of assurance and risk management in your compliance and your reporting through your trust, or whether you're looking at maybe one of your key drivers being sustainability or energy efficiency. What the data enables you to do is really accelerate those, but also critically, I think it's about integrating those data sets and recognizing that these things don't always have to stand alone in the silos as they traditionally have done. It's about pulling together data sets on condition, as Paul has said, but also the elements of cost, of energy, of sustainability, of suitability and sufficiency, and actually recognizing that what we're doing to manage our estates often is ticking multiple boxes. So we might be replacing our windows because they are rotten and need replacement from a condition basis, but what impact is that actually going to be having on our thermal efficiency, and does that form part of a wider project on lowering the heating demand for that building, and could that potentially be looked at through the lens of enabling some low carbon heating systems in the future as well? Are we utilising our buildings in the most effective way from a curriculum planning point of view, and making sure that we're wringing every bit of value out of the way that we're using our estates, rather than just looking immediately at capital projects, refurbishments, remodelling, new builds, before we dive down the very expensive route of building stuff. And I think whichever way you look at it, the data can support you. We tend to try and look at things in this sort of approach. We call it the sort of estates 360, but this is your kind of cycle of estates management, and the data that you've seen today can support you on any part of this journey. So obviously the progress that Paul has made with Jeremy in this is extraordinary, and is sort of sector leading really. But what we wanted to showcase today was the kind of art of the possible, but also to sort of clarify that you can, if you've got that vision of where you can get to, taking some of those initial steps to get you there in the short term. What are the marginal costs of, for example, getting a full set of good quality plans drawn up of your school, rather than just getting the areas drawn up in the areas that you're having project works in, is the classic one that we see. And actually the marginal cost, whilst you've got a surveyor on site, to actually picking up the whole school, and then moving away from a really dated, multiple photocopied set of floor plans that you're trying to use for asbestos management and fire safety and all the things as Paul identified at the beginning. You can get some real value out of that, even if the initial cost looks a bit higher than the minimum you could have spent to deliver your immediate objective. So, looking at this cycle of, and we talk about GEMS review, and I'll sort of highlight a resource that we've created that you might find useful as well. Creating your vision and your strategy, the data can be hugely useful from that in terms of benchmarking prior performance, obviously gathering data relating to condition, relating to energy consumption, relating to suitability and sufficiency, net capacity, all of those things is hugely important to start to put your estate strategy on rails and start measuring, forming KPIs, benchmarking, and then that really feeds into your asset management plan, which in turn you can use to drive your cyclical works program, which would be your day-to-day plan maintenance program, your compliance works, plus the larger capital projects that you're doing in isolated areas to deal with, major areas of condition, perhaps expansion, perhaps remodeling to suit the curriculum, and then critically using some of the data that you're getting to monitor those outcomes and feeding that back into this loop. And we find this sort of way of looking at things is quite helpful. I just wanted to wrap up by showing you some examples of some other kind of dashboards and the ways that trusts are using data to inform decision making at various sort of levels. These are just some screenshots from some of our dashboards. This is looking at the way that we can be looking at sustainability versus condition versus cost all on a page. And I think one of the beauties of data and using the kind of agile platforms like Jeremy's been showing and the Power BI is the ability to slice and dice the information according to the audience and the purpose of the data in the first place, being able to look at creating executive summaries for leadership teams, for governors and governing bodies, and those making those high-level strategic decisions whilst using the same data but viewed through a more detailed lens for the teams that are working operationally in the organisation, looking at creating capital works programs, asset management plans, and the like. And having this single point of truth is so important when we're looking at the integrity of the data and the reliability of it, but also the efficiency, as Paul has mentioned. Let's collect it once, collect it correctly, and then use it to its full extent, rather than collecting the data across multiple different sort of areas and then trying to pull it all together later. This is we talk about managing the funding gap. This is a sort of typical condition sort of survey approach of how do you monitor your school condition allocation, for example, aggregating the maintenance needs of an estate over a 10-year forward look window, aggregating that and then looking at how that compares to your forecast revenue, particularly your SCA allocation, and then looking at the gap to plan. Most people will have far more work that needs doing than you will have funding for. You'll be familiar with that, but it's starting to look at where the gap is, what can we do to address the gap. You might have, for example, a typical one would be you might have a large obligation for doing lighting upgrades because of condition, but actually if you look at that from an energy saving point of view, you're actually going to replace those lights to save money by replacing them with LED fittings, but that actually also at the same time can tick off a condition element. You might look at a leased solution, a lighting as a service solution, which actually takes that out of your capital budget. So we're constantly looking at also smoothing the graph on that cost by year graph on the top right of this dashboard is showing the year by year projected spend on this estate. And you can see there are peaks and troughs, and it's having visibility of that that's really helpful when you're looking at planning, so that you don't spend too much in year one or year two, because actually you've got maybe a big bow wave of work that's projected in year three. Can you reprofile the delivery of that work in the most efficient way by batching projects, perhaps looking at all the roofing that needs doing across the estate in some batches, rather than necessarily doing it in the exact year that's been profiled in your condition survey, so that you can get maybe a larger project gone out to fewer contractors, and you're getting value out of the supply chain. So that's another example of using data in that way. We also talk about the responsibilities. It's reporting spend, on your SCA allocation. What have you spent? What outcomes have you delivered from that? Whether you're reporting back to the DFE on your SCA return at the end of the year, or whether you're reporting up to governors, and particularly we find it useful, going back to this point of the fact that one project doesn't just have one outcome, one driver. Your roofing project will give you a roof that's maybe a flat roof that's now got a 25-year insurance back guarantee on it, but it's also uplifted the U value of that, which means it's going to drop your energy spend. So it's going to be reported on a condition and an energy point of view. And finally, segueing into energy, I think piece of work we did for the Trust Network recently, and you've probably seen us quote this figure, but we're still finding that for most schools, about 60% of your energy is being used when there's no students in the building, and that's a staggering statistic. And you can see in the sort of donut charts there, the green open section is in this example across a large, this is a large section of schools here, sample of schools. We're still seeing huge amount of out of hours energy usage. And so it's highlighting the opportunities to turn things off, to implement programs of behavioral change, to optimize building control systems, to implement capital programs where it might be things like your infrastructure, so your LED lighting, building management systems, low carbon heating systems, and also ultimately looking at things like solar PV and monitoring the performance of those, so that ultimately you can pull all of that data together. And we know that over the last few years, we've seen the huge volatility in the energy market. Everyone's now very, very aware of how exposed we are as a sector, let alone as a country, to the volatility in the energy market. So everything you can do to minimise the amount of energy that you're using is going to be massively beneficial, both from a cost saving point of view, from a risk management point of view, and ultimately from a carbon saving and sustainability point of view as well. So the best way to manage your data, to manage your energy efficiency, is ultimately to first of all understand your consumption, and that's the key to everything. Not only does that help you identify projects and opportunities to save energy, but it also helps you to measure outcomes, measure impact of what you've done, and then communicate that back to the rest of the organisation, whether that's as a board report on where you are against your net carbon zero objectives, or whether that's talking to the staff and students about, okay, we asked you to try and turn the lights off, we asked you to try and reduce paper usage, we asked you to shut the doors and not leave things on standby, and by doing that we have achieved this. And you can use the data and put that in terms that they can understand. We talk about making the invisible visible. So what an example of that, we were talking yesterday on a session with Confederation Schools Trusts on food waste, measuring the food waste in a primary school that was thrown away at the end of every lunchtime, weighing that up, and then it turned out to be the same weight as the PE teacher in the school. So we put him on the stage, and then over a period of time, through a program of trying to educate people about portion sizes and waste and the impact of food waste, that was reduced down to a much smaller level. But by visualizing that in the form of a person rather than as a who knows what 50 kilograms of wasted potatoes looks like, or what does a kilowatt hour of energy look like, or a ton of carbon, putting it into language that people understand. And this is where some of the visualizations that Paul and Jeremy are doing has got immense power. So that's a quick wrap up on that. And I think just as a little bit of slightly lighter hearted way to wrap things up, Paul's got some other visuals which he's going to show you as well, just to show that data doesn't have to be dry.
Cool. Thanks very much, Rob. Okay, so we've had a bit of a crash course in digitalization and the benefits. It's all from strong foundations and understanding your estate, and then obviously you get to have those insights and make those real efficiencies. What you have as well is you can take the BIM into the digital world. And so as a little bit of fun, what we've developed is it transpires you can actually take your BIM models, you can turn them into OBJ files, and you can load them into Minecraft. This is a snapshot video of the world that we've produced. Each of our schools has been digitally captured into Minecraft. Some of the internal layouts are a little bit off because obviously, we're not building it exactly like for like, but the premise of a recognizable school, which the kids and teachers and so forth can interact with. And you go, okay, well, what benefit does it have? Well, firstly, I like innovating, and it was really good fun. The second thing is on the back of that, is it's like can be a transition school. So if you use a Minecraft for education, then this is an educational resource that you can use to teach and allow the kids in those environments to build and play in the familiar. But what about kids that are starting with school? What about kids that are about to transition to secondary school who may be a little bit nervous about what they're going to see and what they're going to expect? And so it can be a transition skill, a tool to aid with that element. And so each school has their own model, but we also have a massive mega world, which is all schools in one. And so, yeah, the kids in Penzance can play against the team up with the kids in Poole, and they can all go raid Notre Dame's resources and so forth. It's fun, it's innovative, it's creative, and it's a resource to understand your built environment. Understanding your built environment and then putting a sustainability stamp on it is this short video here. And what we've done is a proof of concept. The actual lesson, this actual resource should be available next month for anybody to utilize. And what this is teaching, who knew you could teach thermal modeling to kids using Minecraft? Who knew you could teach kids about the benefits of energy and choosing the right materials? So this is a proof of concept because it's not been done in Minecraft again. You know, again, we're innovating and creating something that was simply not being created. And so what the character here is building a building out of a range of different materials. And so as we know, there's no cavity wall insulation there, but never mind. But, we know that thermal, different materials have different thermal properties. Well, how can you teach two children that one material is better than the others? Well, using Minecraft, of course. So we got some stone, we got some wood there, and he's chucking another little bit of block or something on top of that. Now, if we give each of those a thermal value for efficiency, by a simple click of a button, a model appears and it shows you that skill is to that school building, that representative model is to code. Okay, make it better. Well, you go, okay, well, I've got infinite resources. I carry on making my school and build something better, and I'll make sure so that it's all dark blue. Challenge of the game that we're making is the ability that you limit the resources and you put real world costs on top of that so that, the most expensive blocks are the best performing and the cheapest, the worst performing. That's what it's like in real life. And so if you teach rewilding, energy transition, recycling, energy generation, and here thermal modeling, all this is just, a byproduct of our digital models with a new angle and a new spin on it. And yeah, that's me as my little icon, and I'll be in a game somewhere that everybody can play. So little bit of light-hearted humour to finish on. Thank you, Rob. I'll hand back to you.
No, thanks, Paul. That's fantastic. And it's a really good example of how we can try and link the operations and finance and sort of business side of our trusts with the educationalists, and because we quite often see that these can be a bit siloed, and actually, especially when we're talking about that sustainability journey, as Paul was, this is a really good opportunity to start to link those two together. When we look at the DfE's sort of sustainability strategy and we look at climate action plans that every school is meant to have in place by the end of this year, one of those four key areas of those climate action plans by the DfE is on green skills and careers. So that plays to this idea of starting to use the data and the resources at our disposal in the classroom, and to get that engagement, which is critical to reaching your net zero objectives. So I hope you found that useful. We've got a little bit of time for questions. If anyone's got any questions they'd like to put in the chat, or you can even unmute yourself and turn your video on and speak to Paul and Jeremy in real life if you're feeling very brave. So please put any other questions you have on the chat. I just wanted to signpost the QR code that's on the screen, and as I say, we'll share the slides as well. Going back to our sort of estates and GEMS kind of approach, we've created an online sort of tool around the GEMS self-assessment checklist. So if you're thinking about your overall journey on good estates management, where you are in relation to some of these areas of data, of governance, of project management and control, we've got that checklist on there, which you might find helpful to sort of benchmark where you are on the journey and what areas you might particularly want to prioritize for areas of action. So please use that if that's helpful. And if there are any questions coming through, but I was going to ask, I know from the previous session we had some comments on just looking at the journey you've been on, Paul, and it's a pretty extraordinary one in terms of the difference between where much of the sector is and where you've got to. But what were some of the barriers that you came across to actually implement this, and what gave you the sort of motivation and drive to get it through, and what were some of the challenges?
Sure, thanks, Rob. So the challenges we're facing, and they're still ongoing. The trouble is when you're coming up with using BIM for FM management and the digital insights that we're using, essentially we're writing a rule book, particularly for in this series of decarbonisation as well. And so the challenges we've had is you don't know exactly where you want to finish, and you're constantly coming up with new ideas and innovative ways of working and new insights, and somebody comes up with another idea. And so some of the barriers at the moment, have been the data structures. With the best foresight in the world, you can plan the structures of, an asset is inside a room. The room is on the floor is part of a block, the block is part of a school, the school is part of a trust. When you get down to some of the technical requirements, we are having to go back every so often and make a little rewrite, to do that. And obviously, it does cause a little bit of delay and moving on. But the good thing about it is that, we literally do want to write the rule book and share our journey so that other trusts, other organizations, don't waste time going down a particular rabbit hole, and likewise, get those efficiencies. So, yeah, when you're at the cutting edge of doing this, sometimes you make mistakes and trip over your feet, but you live and learn and you move on and go. In terms of, as I said, where we're looking to do in the innovation, FM management, we've got a tender coming up, and it will be based on our BIM and our digital systems, and a requirement to use that and for compliance, for ticketing, help desk, and so on. Smart, element of the granularity of what we have in our skills for the insights, and then just seeing where we push it next, and obviously working with partners like Barker. We've now got significant amounts of solar PV and lighting installed, and so we're making those live connections to those systems. So it's an evolving process, and sometimes you make mistakes, but we're making the mistakes. We're happy to share so that others don't, and we all have a successful granular understanding of our skills and our trust.
Fabulous, thanks. That's really helpful. So I think just to wrap up, conscious of time, and I'm sure everyone's got other things booked in. So thank you for joining us today's session. As I said, we'll share the slides and we'll just trim the recording and make sure that we've got that sorted out and then ready to upload. And thanks, Paul. Put all the contact details for today's speakers, plus my colleague Jonathan, who I've sort of delivered his slides today, but he's the technical whiz behind our dashboards as well. So any queries related to any of these things, or if you want to have a discussion about how to implement these, the costs, the practicalities, where you might want to go with this on your sort of data journey, then please don't hesitate to reach out. Have a go at the Estates 360 self-assessment, and wish you well on your journey. And I hope you found today's session really useful. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.